The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Kensington Palace as Prince William walked through the familiar corridors he had known since childhood. His footsteps echoed softly on the polished floors, but today something felt different. The usual bustle of royal staff seemed quieter, more subdued. As if the entire palace was holding its breath, William had received an unusual message that morning from his private secretary. A letter had arrived through unconventional channels, not bearing the typical official seals or diplomatic markings that usually crossed his desk. Instead, it was a simple envelope with handwriting that seemed somehow familiar. Though he couldn't place where he might have seen it before, Kate had noticed his distraction during breakfast. She watched as he turned the unopened letter over. In his hands, studying the careful script that spelled out his name. Their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, chattered excitedly about their upcoming school activities. But William seemed lost in thought, his mind clearly elsewhere. The letter had come with specific instructions that puzzled him. It requested his presence at a particular address in London, not far from the palace, at exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon. The sender claimed to have something of great importance to show him, something that concerned his family's history, in ways he had never imagined. The mysterious nature of the request intrigued him, though royal protocol demanded caution when dealing with unknown correspondence. As the day progressed, William found himself unable to concentrate on his scheduled meetings. His mind kept returning to the letter, to the strange pull he felt toward discovering its contents. There was something about the handwriting, the careful way his name had been written, that stirred a memory he couldn't quite grasp. It reminded him of his mother's correspondence, though he knew that was impossible. Kate had agreed to accompany him, sensing that whatever awaited them might be too significant to face alone. They had learned over the years that some of life's most profound moments came from unexpected sources, from people and places that existed outside the carefully controlled world of royal engagements and public appearances. The address led them to a modest neighborhood in South London, far from the grandeur of their usual destinations. As their car pulled up to a small terraced house with a well-tended garden, William felt his heart rate quicken. The house looked ordinary enough, with net curtains in the windows and a bright red door that had recently been painted. Yet something about it felt significant, as if this moment had been building toward them for years. An elderly woman appeared at the window, a face lighting up with recognition when she saw their car. She moved away quickly, and within moments, the red door opened. The woman who stood there was perhaps in her 70s, with silver hair neatly arranged and kind eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories. She wore a simple floral dress and a warm smile that immediately put them at ease. William and Kate exchanged glances as they approached the door. The woman's greeting was formal but warm, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. She introduced herself as Margaret, and her voice carried a slight tremor of emotion that suggested this meeting meant everything to her. As they crossed the threshold into her small but immaculately kept home, William noticed photographs covering nearly every surface. The walls were lined with images spanning decades, showing families, celebrations, and quiet moments of everyday life. But it was the particular grouping of photographs on the mantelpiece that caught his attention and made him stop in his tracks. There, among the family portraits and holiday snapshots, were pictures he had never seen before. Images that seemed to show his mother, Princess Diana, in settings he didn't recognize, with people he had never met. His breath caught as he moved closer, Kate following behind him with growing curiosity. Margaret watched their reactions carefully, her hands clasped together as if she were praying. She had waited so many years for this moment, had rehearsed what she would say countless times, but now that William and Kate were actually here, the words seemed to escape her. The photographs told a story that neither William nor Kate could have imagined. They showed Diana in casual clothes, laughing with Margaret and what appeared to be Margaret's family. The pictures captured moments of genuine joy and connection, far removed from the formal poses and public appearances that dominated most images of the late princess. William's voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke, asking Margaret who she was and how she had come to have these photographs. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as she began to explain, her voice growing stronger as she found the courage to share a secret she had kept for over 25 years. She told them that Diana had been more than just a princess to her family. She had been a friend, a confidant, and in many ways, a daughter. The connection had begun through Margaret's work with one of Diana's charities, but it had evolved into something much more personal and profound over the years leading up to Diana's death. As Margaret continued her story, William felt the familiar ache of missing his mother intensify. But alongside the sadness was something else, something he hadn't expected. There was joy in discovering that Diana's capacity for love and connection had extended even further than he had known. She had touched lives in ways that had remained hidden until now. Margaret invited them to sit in her cozy living room, where afternoon light streamed through lace curtains and illuminated more photographs that William was only beginning to notice. As they settled into the comfortable, well-worn furniture, Margaret disappeared briefly into the kitchen, turning with a tea service that looked remarkably similar to one William remembered from his childhood. She poured the tea with steady hands, though William could see the emotion building behind her composed exterior. Kate reached over and gently squeezed William's hand, sensing that whatever they were about to learn would change something fundamental about how they understood Diana's life. Margaret began her story by explaining how she had first met Diana. In 1994, during one of the princess's visits to a homeless shelter where Margaret volunteered, it wasn't one of the high-profile charity events that made headlines. Instead, it was a quiet, private visit that Diana had arranged without fanfare or media attention. What had started as a brief encounter had turned into something extraordinary. Diana had been drawn to Margaret's warmth and genuine nature, and Margaret had been moved by the princess's authentic desire to help others. They had started talking that day, and somehow the conversation had stretched on for hours. Margaret stood up and walked to a small wooden chest that sat beneath the window. Her movements were careful and deliberate, as if she were handling something precious. She lifted the lid and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. Letters that bore Diana's distinctive handwriting. William's breath caught as he recognized his mother's script. These weren't formal correspondence or official communications. These were personal letters filled with the kind of intimate thoughts and feelings that Diana had shared with very few people during her lifetime. Margaret explained that Diana had needed someone outside the royal circle, someone who could offer her the simple gift of friendship without agenda or expectation. In Margaret, she had found not just a friend, but a surrogate mother figure during some of the most difficult years of her life. The letters revealed a side of Diana that even William had rarely seen. They showed her struggles with loneliness, her fears about raising her sons in the public eye, and her deep desire to make a meaningful difference in the world. But they also revealed her joy, her humor, and her unwavering love for William and Harry. One letter, dated just months before her death, spoke specifically about her hopes for her sons' futures. Diana had written about her dreams of seeing them happy and settled, surrounded by love and family. She had expressed her worry that they might struggle to find genuine connections in their unique positions, but also her faith that they would grow into men who could change the world for the better. Kate wiped away tears as Margaret read excerpts from the letters, each one revealing new depths to the woman who had become a legend, but whom they were now understanding as never before. Diana's words spoke of ordinary moments that had meant everything to her, quiet conversations with her sons, laughter shared over silly jokes, the simple pleasure of tucking them into bed at night. But it was Margaret's next revelation that truly stunned them. She explained that Diana had established a small private fund to help Margaret's own family during a difficult period. Margaret's daughter had been battling serious illness, and the medical bills had threatened to overwhelm them financially. Diana hadn't just provided money, though her financial help had been crucial. She had visited Margaret's daughter in the hospital, bringing books and flowers and, most importantly, her presence. She had sat by the bedside during long treatment sessions, offering comfort and hope during the darkest hours. Margaret opened another section of the chest and carefully withdrew a child's drawing. It showed a princess with yellow hair holding hands with a little girl, both of them smiling under a bright sun. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Princess Diana, for making me feel better." The drawing had been created by Margaret's granddaughter, who was now a grown woman with children of her own. Diana had kept a copy of the drawing, and Margaret had treasured the original. It represented not just a moment of kindness, but the beginning of a relationship that had enriched both families in ways that couldn't be measured. William learned that Diana had attended Margaret's daughter's wedding, sitting quietly in the back of the church and slipping away before anyone could approach her for photographs or autographs. She had wanted to share in the joy of the moment without turning it into a media spectacle. Margaret showed them a photo from that day, a candid shot that captured Diana's genuine happiness as she watched the ceremony. Her face glowed with the kind of pure joy that came from witnessing love triumph over adversity, from seeing a family she cared about celebrate a milestone that might not have been possible without her help. These revelations painted a picture of Diana that complemented, but expanded everything William thought he knew about his mother. She had been not just the people's princess, beloved by millions, but also an individual woman who had formed deep personal connections that had lasted beyond her death. Margaret explained that she had never shared these stories publicly because Diana had valued their privacy. The princess had found solace in having relationships that existed outside the glare of media attention, connections that were based purely on mutual affection and respect rather than her royal status. As the afternoon light began to fade, Margaret revealed that there was more to show them. She had saved the most significant revelation for last, something that would help William understand not just his mother's character, but also the impact she continued to have on the world even decades after her death. Margaret rose from her chair with a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. She had shared the easier parts of her story, the beautiful memories and touching moments that had defined her, a friendship with Diana. But now came the revelation that had prompted her to reach out to William after all these years of keeping her promise to remain silent. She walked to an old oak cabinet that stood against the far wall of the living room. The cabinet looked like it had been in her family for generations, its dark wood polished to a warm shine despite its obvious age. Margaret withdrew a key from her pocket, one that she wore on a thin chain around her neck. Hidden beneath her clothing, William and Kate watched in fascination as she unlocked the cabinet and carefully removed a leather portfolio. The portfolio was old, but well-maintained, its brown leather softened by years of handling. Margaret's movements were reverent, as if she were conducting a sacred ritual that she had practiced many times in private. She returned to her seat and placed the portfolio on the coffee table between them. For a moment, she simply looked at it, her hands resting gently on its surface. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made both William and Kate lean forward, vindictively. Margaret explained that in the final months of Diana's life, the princess had become increasingly concerned about ensuring that her charitable work would continue beyond her own lifetime. She had been working on plans for a foundation that would operate differently from the typical royal charities, one that would focus on direct, personal intervention in individual lives rather than large-scale institutional giving, Diana had shared. Her vision with Margaret during their last meeting together, just 2 weeks before the fateful trip to Paris, she had been excited about the possibilities, talking animatedly about how they could help people in ways that traditional charity work often missed. She wanted to create something that would touch individual hearts and change specific lives, person by person. Margaret opened the portfolio, revealing documents that Diana had prepared in her own handwriting. These weren't official papers or legal documents, but rather detailed plans and heartfelt notes about how she envisioned her future charitable endeavors. The papers showed a woman who was thinking deeply about legacy, about the mark she wanted to leave on the world. One document was particularly moving. It was a list Diana had compiled of people she hoped to help, individuals she had met during her charity work who had touched her heart. Next to each name, she had written specific plans for how she might be able to improve their circumstances. The list included Margaret's family, but it extended to dozens of others Diana had encountered over the years. William recognized some of the names from stories his mother had told him. People she had met at hospitals and shelters, families struggling with poverty or illness. But there were many names he didn't know, representing the vast network of personal connections Diana had built outside the public. Margaret revealed that Diana had asked her to be the executor of these informal plans should anything happen. To her, at the time, Margaret had assumed it was just Diana being cautious, perhaps worried about the ongoing media attention and public scrutiny that had intensified around her personal life. But Diana's death had come so suddenly that there had been no opportunity to formalize these charitable intentions. In the chaos and grief that followed, Margaret had felt unable to approach the royal family with what might have seemed like presumptuous claims about Diana's wishes. Instead, she had taken it upon herself to quietly carry out some of Diana's intended acts of kindness, using her own modest savings and occasionally seeking help from others who had known Diana. Margaret had spent the past 25 years trying to honor her friend's final wishes. She showed William and Kate a second document from the portfolio, a carefully maintained record of every person they had been able to help over the years. The list was extensive, including assistance with medical bills, educational expenses, housing deposits, and countless other needs that Diana had identified during her lifetime. Margaret's daughter, fully recovered from her illness, had eventually joined her mother in this quiet mission. Together, they had created an informal network of people who contributed time, money, and resources to continue Diana's work in the most personal way possible. Kate was amazed to learn that this network had grown over the years to include dozens of people, many of whom had been helped by Diana during her lifetime and who now wanted to pay her kindness forward to others. They had operated entirely below the radar, never seeking recognition or publicity for their efforts. One story particularly moved William. Margaret told them about a young mother Diana had met at a women's shelter, a woman who had been struggling to escape an abusive relationship while caring for two small children. Diana had arranged temporary housing and childcare, giving the woman the breathing space she needed to rebuild her life. That woman had eventually become a social worker, dedicating her career to helping other women in similar situations. She had named her charity work in Diana's honor, though she had never publicly revealed the connection. Through Margaret's network, she had been able to help dozens of other families over the years. Margaret opened to a section of the portfolio that contained photographs documenting their charitable work over the decades. The pictures showed graduations, weddings, new businesses opening, children who had grown up healthy and strong because of assistance they had received. Each photograph represented a life that had been touched by Diana's original kindness and the ongoing commitment of those who had known her. William realized that his mother's legacy was far more extensive than anyone had ever imagined. While the world remembered her public charitable work and her impact on causes like landmine clearance and AIDS awareness, there was an entire hidden dimension to her giving that had continued to ripple outward for decades. Margaret explained that she had decided to reach out to William now because she was getting older and worried about what would happen to their informal network when she was no longer able to coordinate it. She also felt that William deserved to know about this aspect of his mother's life and death, particularly as he and Kate had begun to expand their own charitable work. But there was one more revelation waiting, something that Margaret had saved for last because she knew it would be the most emotionally challenging for William to hear. She reached for the final section of the portfolio, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to share the most significant secret she had kept for over 2 decades. Margaret's hands shook as she reached for the final section of the leather portfolio. The weight of keeping this secret for so many years had grown heavier with each passing day. And now that the moment had arrived to share it, she felt both relief and terror in equal measure. She withdrew a sealed envelope that looked different from everything else they had seen. This envelope was thicker, more formal, and bore Diana's personal seal pressed into red wax. The seal was unbroken, exactly as Diana had given it to her during their final meeting. Margaret's voice dropped to almost a whisper as she explained that Diana had handed her this envelope with specific instructions. She was only to open it and share its contents with William if something happened to Diana, and only when she felt the time was absolutely right. For 25 years, Margaret had wrestled with the decision of when that right time might be. She had watched William grow from a grieving teenager into a man, husband, and father. She had observed his charitable work and seen how he honored his mother's memory. Finally, she had decided that his recent initiatives in mental health awareness and his obvious dedication to his family made this the moment Diana would have wanted. William's heart pounded as Margaret carefully broke the wax seal, her movements deliberate and reverent. Kate moved closer to her husband, sensing that whatever was in this envelope would be profound and possibly overwhelming. The envelope contained several pages in Diana's handwriting, along with a small wooden box that rattled softly when Margaret lifted it from the envelope. The first page was addressed directly to William, the note indicating it should only be read when he was old enough to understand its full significance. Margaret handed William the letter, and as he began to read, his mother's words, tears immediately filled his eyes. Diana had written this letter knowing she might never have the chance to speak these words to him directly. It was both a love letter and a confession, filled with hopes for his future and explanations about choices she had made during her life. The letter revealed Diana's deepest fears about raising her sons in the public eye. She wrote about the constant pressure she felt between protecting their privacy and fulfilling her royal duties. She expressed her worry that the media attention and public scrutiny might damage their ability to form genuine relationships and find true happiness. But the letter also contained Diana's greatest hopes for William's future. She wrote about her dreams of seeing him marry someone who would love him for himself rather than his title, someone who would understand the unique challenges of royal life while helping him stay grounded in what truly mattered. As William read these words, while sitting next to Kate, the accuracy of his mother's hopes became almost overwhelming. Diana had somehow anticipated the kind of life he would build, the kind of woman he would choose to share it with, the kind of father he would become. The letter contains specific advice about balancing public duty with personal happiness, guidance that resonated deeply with challenges William had faced throughout his adult life. Diana wrote about the importance of finding trusted friends outside the royal circle, people who could offer honest perspective and genuine affection without ulterior motives. Margaret represented exactly the kind of relationship Diana had been describing. She had been someone Diana could trust completely, someone who had valued their friendship more than any potential gain from knowing a princess. The final section of the letter addressed the small wooden box. Diana explained that it contained something she had kept secret from everyone except Margaret. Inside were items that represented the happiest moments of Diana's life, things she had collected over the years that reminded her of love, joy, and hope. William opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, he found a collection of small treasures that told the story of his mother's inner life. There was a pressed flower from the garden at Kensington Palace, taken from a spot where she had often played with William and Harry. When they were small children, there was a smooth stone from a beach in Wales where Diana had taken the boys for a private holiday, away from cameras and official obligations. She had written a tiny note explaining that it was from the day William had first successfully skipped stones across the water, a moment of pure childhood joy that had made her incredibly proud. The box contained a tiny silver locket that Diana had worn as a child, given to her by her own mother. Inside the locket were microscopic photographs of William and Harry as babies, pictures so small they could barely be seen without a magnifying glass, but which Diana had treasured above all her more formal jewelry. There was also a letter from a child Diana had met during one of her hospital visits, a little girl who had drawn a picture of Diana with angel wings. The child had written that she thought Diana must be an angel because she made everyone feel better just by being there, but perhaps the most moving item in the box was a simple white handkerchief, embroidered with the letter W in blue thread. Diana had written a note explaining that she had made this handkerchief herself during the months before William's birth, spending hours learning embroidery techniques, so she could create something personal and meaningful for her first child. Margaret watched William and Kate's reactions as they examined each item, remembering the day Diana had shown them to her and explained their significance. Diana had been preparing for a trip. She had wanted someone trustworthy to know about these treasures in case anything happened to her. The letter concluded with Diana's most heartfelt wishes for William's future. She wrote about her hope that he would find the courage to pursue his own path while honoring the responsibilities that came with his birth. She expressed her confidence that he would become a man who could change the world through kindness and compassion, just as she had tried to do. Diana's final words in the letter were a promise. She wrote that even if she couldn't be there to see his adult life unfold, her love would always be with him. She promised that every act of kindness he performed, every life he touched, and every moment of joy he experienced would be a continuation of their connection. As William finished reading, the room fell silent, except for the soft sound of tears falling. Margaret reached across and gently squeezed his hand, just as Diana might have done. In that moment, William felt his mother's presence more strongly than he had since her death, as if her love had been waiting all these years to reach him through Margaret's faithful guardianship. But Margaret had one final surprise for them, something that would transform their understanding of not just Diana's legacy, but also their own power to continue her work in ways they had never imagined possible. Margaret stood up once more, but this time her movements carried a sense of anticipation rather than the nervous energy she had displayed earlier. She walked to the window and drew back the curtains fully, allowing the late afternoon sunlight to flood the room with golden warmth. She turned to William and Kate with a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. Her earlier nervousness had been replaced by something that could only be described as joy. As if sharing Diana's secrets had lifted a tremendous burden from her shoulders, Margaret explained that there was one more thing Diana had asked her to do, something that had required careful planning and coordination over many years. Diana had not just wanted to help individual people during her lifetime. She had wanted to create a sustainable way for her kindness to continue growing and spreading long after she was gone. She revealed that the informal network of helpers she had mentioned earlier was far more organized and extensive than she had initially let on. What had started as a few people carrying out Diana's final wishes had evolved into something remarkable. A hidden charitable organization that had been quietly operating for over 2 decades. Margaret walked to her telephone table and withdrew a thick folder that had been hidden beneath other papers. She opened it to reveal detailed records of their organization's activities, complete with financial statements, volunteer lists, and impact reports that would rival any major charity. The network now included over 200 active volunteers. Across the United Kingdom and beyond, many were people who had been helped by Diana during her lifetime. But others had joined after learning about the group's work through word of mouth. They included doctors, teachers, social workers, business owners, and retirees who all contributed according to their abilities. What made this organization unique was its approach to charitable work. Instead of large-scale projects and administrative overhead, they focused on direct, personal intervention in individual lives. When someone in their network learned about a person or family in need, they would quietly mobilize resources to provide exactly the kind of help that was required. Margaret showed them photographs from their recent activities. There were images of teenagers receiving university scholarships, families being helped to keep their homes during financial crises, and elderly people being provided with companionship and practical support. Each photograph represented a life that had been touched by Diana's continuing influence. One story particularly moved. Kate, the network, had helped a young woman who had been struggling to escape homelessness while caring for her disabled child. They had provided temporary housing, childcare support, and job training. The woman had eventually become a nurse and now worked with homeless families herself. Creating an endless cycle of compassion, Margaret revealed that they had named their organization the Helping Hand, after something Diana used to say about her charitable work. Diana had often told Margaret that she didn't want to be remembered for grand gestures or public ceremonies, but simply for extending a helping hand to those who needed it most. The organization had remained secret, partly to protect the privacy of those they helped, but also because Diana had believed that anonymous giving was more pure than charity done for recognition. The volunteers found deep satisfaction in knowing that their work honored Diana's memory while making real differences in people's lives. But Margaret's most surprising revelation was yet to come. She explained that the Helping Hand had been financially sustainable all these years. not just through small donations from volunteers, but because Diana had left specific instructions for how her personal savings should be used. Diana had secretly accumulated a substantial sum of money over the years. Through careful management of her personal allowances and gifts she had received, rather than leaving this money through formal legal channels, she had entrusted it to Margaret with instructions to use it gradually to fund their charitable work. Margaret opened a bank statement that showed the current balance of what they now called the Diana Fund. Even after 25 years of helping others, there was still enough money to continue their work for many more decades, especially as the network had learned to leverage their resources effectively. William was stunned to learn that his mother had been planning this legacy in such detail. She had essentially created a perpetual charitable organization that could continue her work indefinitely, all while keeping it completely separate from the official royal charities and public attention. Margaret explained that she had waited to reveal this to William because she wanted him to see that Diana's legacy was already secure and thriving. She hadn't reached out to him because she needed help or resources, because she believed it was time for him to know about this dimension of his mother's impact on the world. But now Margaret had a proposal for William and Kate, something that could transform the helping hand from a hidden network into something even more powerful, while maintaining the personal touch that Diana had valued so deeply. She suggested that William and Kate could become patrons of the helping hand, not in the traditional royal sense of lending their names to public fundraising campaigns, but as active participants in the organization's work. They could help identify people in need through their own charitable activities and connect them with the network's resources. This partnership would allow William and Kate to honor Diana's memory in the most direct way possible by continuing the exact type of work she had been most passionate about. It would also give them a way to engage in charitable activities that were completely personal and private, away from media attention and public scrutiny. Margaret had one final surprise for them. She led them to her back garden where she had created a small memorial space that few people had ever seen. It was a simple flower garden with a stone bench, designed as a place for quiet reflection and remembrance. But what made this space special was not its beauty, but its purpose. Margaret explained that Diana had helped her design this garden during one of their last meetings together. It was meant to be a place where people could come to find peace and hope, regardless of their circumstances or background. Over the years, many of the people helped by the helping hand had visited this garden. Some came to reflect on their own journeys from difficulty to stability. Others came to think about how they could help others in turn. The garden had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for those whose lives had been touched by Diana's continuing legacy. As they sat on the stone bench together, surrounded by flowers that Diana had helped choose, William felt a profound sense of connection to his mother's true spirit. This wasn't the public Diana of media coverage and official portraits, but the private woman who had found her greatest joy in helping others heal and grow. As the sun began to set, casting the garden in soft purple and gold light, William and Kate sat in profound silence on the stone bench. The weight of everything they had learned seemed to settle around them like a warm blanket, comforting yet overwhelming in its significance. Margaret had given them space to process the revelations of the day, quietly tending to her flowers while they absorbed the magnitude of Diana's hidden legacy. The garden seemed to pulse with life and love, every bloom a testament to the continuing power of compassion and kindness. William finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion as he told Margaret how grateful he was that she had kept her promise to his mother for so many years. He could barely comprehend the dedication it had taken to maintain this network. To honor Diana's wishes so faithfully while asking for nothing in return, Kate reached for William's hand as he struggled to find words for what he was feeling. She had watched him grow and change throughout their relationship, but she had never seen him look quite like this. There was something in his expression that spoke of pieces falling into place, of understanding himself and his purpose in ways he never had before. Margaret returned to sit with them as the garden grew darker around them. She explained that sharing these secrets had been one of the most difficult and rewarding experiences of her life. For so many years, she had carried the burden of being the sole keeper of Diana's most personal wishes. Now, finally, that responsibility could be shared with the people who had the most right to know about it. William asked Margaret what Diana would have thought about the work they had accomplished over the past 25 years. Margaret smiled as she replied that Diana would have been amazed and proud beyond measure. The network had grown far beyond anything Diana had originally envisioned, touching hundreds of lives in ways that continued to ripple outward through families and communities. But Margaret also believed that Diana would have been most proud of William himself, of the man he had become, and the family he had built with Kate. She had always worried that her sons might struggle to find genuine happiness and authentic relationships. But William's life had proven that love could triumph over even the most challenging circumstances. Kate spoke about how honored she felt to learn about this aspect of Diana's life. She had always known that William's mother had been special, but understanding the depth of her compassion and the careful planning that had gone into ensuring her legacy would continue had given her a new appreciation for the woman who had shaped the man she loved. The conversation turned to practical matters as they discussed how William and Kate might become involved with the helping hand. Margaret emphasized that their participation would need to be entirely on their own terms, respecting their royal duties while allowing them to engage in the kind of personal, meaningful, charitable work that Diana had treasured most. They talked about ways to expand the network's reach without compromising its intimate, personal approach to helping others. William was particularly interested in connecting the helping hand with his own mental health initiatives. Recognizing that many of the people they helped were dealing with psychological as well as financial challenges, Kate suggested that they might be able to identify families in need through their own charitable visits and public engagements, creating a bridge between their official duties and this more private form of service. The idea excited all of them, as it represented a way to make their public work more personally meaningful while honoring Diana's memory. As the evening grew darker, Margaret brought out a small lantern to light their continuing conversation. The soft glow created an intimate atmosphere that seemed perfect for making plans and sharing dreams. They talked about specific ways they could help expand the Helping Hand's work, from providing additional funding to connecting the network with other charitable organizations. William made a promise to Margaret that evening, speaking with the kind of formal solemnity that marked the most important moments of his life. He pledged that he and Kate would not only support the Helping Hand, but would work to ensure that Diana's approach to charitable giving would influence all of their future humanitarian efforts. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she accepted William's promise. She told him that this commitment meant more to her than any official recognition or public acknowledgement ever could. Knowing that Diana's work would continue through her son felt like the completion of a sacred trust that had sustained her. For decades, they made plans to meet again within the week, to begin the practical work of integrating William and Kate into the Helping Hand's operations. Margaret would introduce them to key volunteers and show them the detailed systems that had been developed to identify, help, and follow up with the people they assisted. As they prepared to leave, Margaret gave William and Kate copies of all the documents they had seen, along with additional materials that would help them understand the full scope of their mother's hidden charitable work. She also gave them keys to the memorial garden, inviting them to visit whenever they needed a quiet place to feel connected to Diana's memory. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, with William and Kate lost in their own thoughts about everything they had experienced. The familiar streets of London looked different somehow, as if learning about Diana's secret network had revealed hidden layers of compassion and connection that existed all around them. When they finally arrived home, their children were already asleep, but William found himself standing in the doorway of each bedroom, watching George, Charlotte, and Louis sleep peacefully. He thought about Diana's letter and her hopes for his future happiness. Realizing that her dreams for him had come true in ways she could never have imagined, Kate found him in George's room, tears streaming down his face as he watched their eldest son sleep. She put her arms around him, and together they stood in the quiet darkness, both understanding that this day had changed something fundamental about how they saw their roles as parents, as members of the royal family, and as human beings committed to making the world better. Later that evening, as they sat together in their private sitting room, William and Kate talked about the profound responsibility they now carried. They were not just inheriting knowledge about Diana's charitable work. They were becoming guardians of a legacy that had quietly touched hundreds of lives over the past 25 years. William called his brother Harry that night, knowing that this discovery needed to be shared with him as well. Though Harry lived far away now, the bond between the brothers remained strong. And William knew that learning about their mother's hidden network would be as meaningful to Harry as it had been to him. The conversation with Harry was emotional and healing, as both brothers realized that their understanding of their mother's impact on the world had been incomplete until now. They made plans for Harry to meet Margaret during his next visit to the UK, ensuring that both of Diana's sons would be connected to this remarkable legacy. In the days that followed, William and Kate began the process of becoming actively involved. With the helping hand, they attended their first network meeting in Margaret's living room, joining a circle of volunteers who had been quietly carrying out Diana's work for decades. The meeting was unlike any charitable organization gathering they had ever attended. There were no formal presentations or fundraising discussions. Instead, volunteers simply shared stories about people they had helped and brainstormed solutions for current cases that needed attention. William was moved by the personal nature of each case. These weren't statistics or abstract problems. They were real people with names, faces, and specific challenges that required creative, compassionate responses. He began to understand why Diana had found this type of work so fulfilling. Kate immediately connected with the network's approach to helping families with young children. Her own experience as a mother gave her insight into the particular challenges faced by parents struggling with poverty, illness, or domestic violence. She began developing ideas for how the Helping Hand could expand its support for vulnerable families. Within a month, William and Kate had quietly helped their first family. Through the Helping Hand network, a young father who had lost his job due to illness was struggling to keep up with rent payments while caring for his disabled daughter. The network was able to provide temporary financial assistance while helping him find new employment that accommodated his family responsibilities. The experience of helping this family directly, without media attention or public recognition, gave William and Kate a sense of satisfaction that was different from their official charitable duties. They began to understand why Diana had valued this type of anonymous giving so highly, as word spread quietly through the Helping Hand network that Diana's son and daughter-in-law had joined their efforts. Longtime volunteers felt a renewed sense of purpose and connection to their founder's memory. Many had wondered over the years whether Diana's sons knew about their work, and learning that William and Kate wanted to continue, it felt like a sacred validation of everything they had accomplished. Margaret watched with deep satisfaction as William and Kate settled into their roles within the network. She could see Diana's compassion and commitment reflected in their approach to helping others,